The homeless man stood at the edge of the road, still and silent, his coat worn, his eyes sharp, as if the city itself dared not touch him. Olivia hesitated, drawn to him despite every warning. His gaze locked on hers, then dropped, not to her hands, not to the car, but to the silver compass resting at her collarbone. His breath hitched, a tremor of recognition buried under years of pain and waiting. The light turned green. Cars surged forward. She should have driven away. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the busy city street, turning the asphalt into a mirror of gold and smoke. Olivia Bennet navigated her small sedan through the traffic, mind only half on the errands she had stacked for herself, the other half lingering on the mundane monotony of her life. That was when she noticed him, a man at the side of the road, motionless, his coat frayed at the edges, boots caked with dirt, yet somehow commanding attention. Most pedestrians passed without a glance. Drivers honked and cursed, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't asking for money, food, or charity. He was simply there, observing. Something inside Olivia paused. It was instinct, sharp and uncompromising. The same instinct that had once made her rescue a stray dog from a freezing alley, or hand her lunch to the elderly woman who shuffled down the corner street every morning. She slowed, her tires rumbling across the asphalt as the light ahead turned amber. The man's eyes caught hers then, piercing through the car window with a clarity that unsettled her. There was weight in that gaze, a depth that felt like it carried decades of unspeakable experience. Her pulse quickened, a prickle of unease threading through her skin. She looked away, telling herself it was nothing. A homeless man, no name, no story she needed to untangle. Yet she couldn't. Her eyes returned to him despite herself. Do you need help? She asked, almost muttering, more to herself than to him. Her fingers instinctively brushed the small silver compass that hung around her neck. A childhood keepsake she had long accepted as a talisman against the world's uncertainties. He shifted forward. Slow, deliberate, every step measured, carrying a patience that could only come from someone who had waited far longer than anyone should ever endure. His eyes scanned her, not the car, not her hands, not the street. Her breath caught, a quiet vibration threading through the air between them. I can offer a place to rest, Olivia said before she could stop herself, rolling down the window halfway. The city's roar felt muted in that instant, as if it too were holding its breath. He looked at her, then past her, and his gaze fell on the compass against her collarbone. His hand twitched slightly, a subtle, human reflex that betrayed the calm he otherwise wore like armor. A horn blared behind her. Cars pressed close, and the light shifted to green, forcing movement into the moment. Yet Olivia did not move. She remained rooted, unable to explain why her instinct refused to follow the rules she had always lived by. The man's lips parted, almost imperceptibly, and his voice came soft but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had commanded rooms and faced impossible decisions, yet was now stripped to something unrecognizable. Where did you get that necklace? The question trembled between them, fragile and electric, carrying a tension she could not name but felt in every nerve. It was more than curiosity. It was recognition. And in that instant, without knowing why, Olivia had no idea she had stopped at a red light that had become the crossroads of a story that would unravel her life, her past, and the invisible threads she had spent 24 years trying to ignore. This is scene 1. Fully cinematic, suspenseful, foreshadowing. Introducing the characters' tension and connection, with dialogue and narrative exposition. Without revealing the world's richest man twist, Olivia's hands gripped the steering wheel longer than necessary, as if the leather could anchor her to reason while her mind spiraled. The man had stepped aside, letting traffic pass, yet she couldn't shake the weight of his gaze. There was something in the way he moved, calculated, controlled, that suggested survival not born of streets but of battles far beyond them. She forced herself to look away, scanning the mundane chaos of cars and pedestrians. Yet the image of him remained, etched against the light falling in streaks across the asphalt. As she drove toward her small apartment, memories she hadn't touched in years began to stir. 7. That was her age when her life first fractured in ways she would never fully articulate. She had been small and reckless, running across the park with a yellow dress clinging to her knees, the sunlight catching her hair in golden strands, laughing at something her father had said. The silver compass around her neck, a gift he had given her with solemn eyes and a promise too large for a child to understand, had been warm against her chest that day. She remembered the way he had smiled, kissed her forehead, and told her to wait while he went to buy ice cream. The world had been simple then, as simple as her father's presence. But when he returned, she hadn't been there. A chill ran down Olivia's spine, and she pressed her hands against the wheel, her knuckles whitening. The memory had always been fragmented, more shadow than substance. Her father had disappeared, and the years that followed had been filled with whispers, strangers claiming to know him, and a mother who never explained. The compass had survived, though, a single thread connecting her to a past she barely remembered but never abandoned. Meanwhile, at the side of the street, the man she had noticed lingered in her mind like a question she couldn't answer. His presence had been deliberate, as if he had chosen that exact moment to appear, and the way his eyes had caught her so piercing, so unnervingly certain made her stomach twist. She found herself glancing repeatedly into the rearview mirror, though she knew instinctively he was gone by now. Absorbed back into the city's shadows dot in the back of her mind, the thought nagged at her. Why had he looked at her necklace with that intensity, as though it contained a secret he could not name? Olivia had worn the compass for so long that it was nearly invisible to her, yet the man had noticed. He had noticed in a way that suggested memory, or recognition, or something older, something that belonged to time itself. Her apartment building loomed ahead, brick and concrete worn by decades, ordinary and safe in comparison to the edges she had just glimpsed on the street. Parking her car, she took a deep breath, shaking off the unease. She told herself it was just coincidence, a homeless man, a silver necklace, a street intersection. Nothing more. Yet as she entered her apartment and locked the door behind her, the feeling lingered, curling like smoke in the corners of the room. Somewhere deep inside, buried beneath routines and small comforts, a spark had ignited, a spark that whispered, impossibly, that the man had not been a stranger at all, that the world was far more complicated than it had ever seemed, and that a reckoning of past, loss, and hidden truths was inching closer to her life, waiting silently for the right moment to strike. She didn't know it yet, but in a city of millions, at a street corner watched by no one, the threads of her life had begun to tangle with a man who was no ordinary soul, a man whose presence would unravel every certainty she had held, and whose shadow had been cast over her life long before she ever noticed it. This scene continues tension, deepens Olivia's backstory, foreshadows the father-daughter connection, and subtly hints at the homeless man's hidden depth, keeping suspense tight without revealing the identity. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning, Olivia couldn't shake the image of the man from her mind. His presence had left a residue, a sense that the air itself had shifted where he stood. She sipped her coffee, staring out the window at the street below, half expecting to see him again. And then, as if drawn by the same invisible thread, he appeared. Not walking, not panhandling, but simply standing at the edge of the sidewalk, watching the city move past him with that same uncanny patience. Olivia's stomach twisted. She wanted to look away, to tell herself that it was coincidence, but something about him defied logic. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket and keys, descending the stairs of her apartment building faster than usual. "Hey," she called before she even realized she was speaking aloud, her voice trembling slightly. The man turned, his eyes meeting hers instantly. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. There was no recognition in his expression, yet something ancient and quiet lingered behind the surface, like a tide pulling silently beneath the shore. "You." "Again," Olivia said, her words a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Are you okay?" He shifted his weight slightly, hands tucked inside his coat pockets. "I'm fine," he replied softly. "I just need a place to rest for a while. Maybe food. Nothing more." His tone was controlled, almost rehearsed, but the slight tremor at the edges betrayed a vulnerability he did not fully intend to show. Olivia steadied him. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way his eyes scanned the city without panic, without greed, that seemed deliberate. Not the desperation of someone who had been left behind, but the calculation of someone who had survived far too much and was still very much aware of it. I can help," she said finally, gesturing toward the small cafe she ran in her apartment complex. "Just come inside, sit, eat. You don't have to explain anything." He paused at the doorway, then stepped inside. As he walked past, Olivia noticed the precision in his movements, the subtle attention to detail that felt out of place for a man who had clearly lived on the streets. He sat quietly, letting her place a plate of food in front of him, and he ate slowly, methodically, as if savoring not just the taste but the act itself. "So," Olivia said, trying to break the silence, You don't usually beg." Her curiosity was sharper now, pointed. "Most people," he looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time fully, and something unspoken passed between them. "Most people aren't patient enough to notice when someone's already waiting." His words were strange, almost cryptic, but there was a weight to them, as if they carried a story buried deep beneath years of shadows. For a moment, Olivia felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The man was more than he seemed. Every movement, every glance suggested knowledge, power, and experience that contradicted his ragged appearance. And yet, there was an unspoken humility, a quiet suffering that clung to him like a second skin. As he ate, she caught a glimpse of something under his coat, a faint glint, like a watch or a ring. Perfectly ordinary, yet almost too deliberate for someone who lived on the streets. She told herself it was nothing, but the thought lingered, crawling into her mind like smoke through the cracks of a building. And somewhere deep inside, Olivia felt it. This man was no ordinary stranger. And the compass at her neck suddenly seemed heavier than it had ever been, as though it, too, sensed the invisible thread pulling them together across time, across memory, across a story neither of them fully understood yet. This scene continues the suspense, builds dialogue-driven tension, subtly foreshadows the homeless man's hidden intelligence and past wealth, and keeps the audience questioning his identity, all while deepening Olivia's engagement with him. The cafe smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, the kind of scent that promised normalcy but carried the ghosts of 1,000 small tragedies. Olivia cleaned the counter absently, her eyes flicking toward the man at the corner table, still hunched over his untouched cup, silent but present, like a shadow that refused to leave. She wondered what he had endured, what paths had brought him here. Standing at a street corner the day before, observing the city as if it had betrayed him, her thoughts drifted back, unbidden, to a memory she rarely allowed herself to touch. She was 7, running across the park in the sunlight with her yellow dress swaying, clutching the small silver compass her father had given her that morning. He had knelt beside her, smoothing her hair with calloused hands, telling her to wait while he went to buy ice cream. She remembered the sweetness of vanilla melting against her tongue, the warmth of his coat when he held her hand, the laughter that had filled the air. Then, like a shadow sliding over the sun, everything had vanished. She had been gone when he returned, the blanket empty, the compass gone for a moment before it had tangled around her small fingers again. The memory had always been fragmented, a puzzle missing a piece she could not name. Over the years, whispers of strangers claiming to know her father, forged letters, and manipulative imposters had filled the gaps, but none of them had ever made sense. The world she remembered, the laughter, the warmth, the safety had ended abruptly, leaving only fragments, like shards of glass embedded in her chest. Olivia shook her head, trying to banish the recollection, yet the compass felt heavier around her neck now, its presence grounding and alarming all at once. She glanced at the man again. He had finished his coffee, yet he had not touched the pastry she had placed beside it. He didn't eat quickly or absent-mindedly. He had the deliberate calm of someone who had seen abundance, then loss, then waited decades to witness anything again. "You're quiet," she said softly, stepping closer, the words tentative, a bridge between them. "You don't talk much, do you?" He raised his head slowly, meeting her gaze with eyes that seemed to carry weight she could not name. "I've had my share of listening," he said, voice calm, almost rehearsed, "and I've learned it's often safer than speaking." His words weren't boastful, nor mysterious. They were measured, deliberate. There was something in the cadence that felt familiar, like an echo she couldn't place, but it tugged at the edges of memory, tugged at the compass against her collarbone. "Listening," she murmured, studying him. "That makes sense. Some things are too big for words, for a heartbeat." They were both silent, each immersed in their own labyrinth of pasts and losses. Then, almost instinctively, the man's gaze drifted toward her neck, lingering. It was subtle, careful, yet intense, as if he had recognized not just the object but the story embedded in it. A story that only someone who had known her from the very beginning could understand. A shiver crawled along Olivia's spine. The compass, the memory of the park, the fragments of stories she had been told about her father, all of it converged in the quiet intensity of this stranger's gaze. She couldn't explain why, but something inside her told her that this man, ragged and silent as he was, had been waiting for a moment just like this, for something just like her. Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious, and in that oblivion, attention settled, a fragile thread connecting past and present, loss and discovery, stranger and daughter, yet neither fully aware of the truth hovering between them like smoke in sunlight. The day had grown warmer, yet the cafe felt insulated from the sun, as if it existed in a bubble where time slowed and the ordinary rules of the outside world had no hold. Olivia moved between tables, clearing dishes, but her attention kept drifting to the man who had not touched anything beyond his coffee earlier. There was an unusual calm in the way he observed the room's small details, habits, and patterns without appearing conspicuous. The way he noticed the loose floorboard near the counter, the uneven stack of napkins, even the way her watch rested slightly tilted on her wrist unnerved her. Most people living on the streets survived by instinct, not observation. Yet this man noticed everything, as though the world had been reduced to signals and patterns, and he read them with the precision of someone who had never been allowed to overlook anything. You notice a lot, Olivia ventured cautiously, trying to break the tension. Even small things. He glanced at her briefly, eyes still sharp and assessing, but softened slightly. It's a habit. Helps you survive, he said, voice low. And sometimes, it helps you find what you've lost. The words struck her in a way that made her pause. Not cryptic, not poetic, simply weighted with a truth she didn't fully understand. She studied him more closely now, remembering the red thread of memory that always hummed when she touched the compass around her neck. There was something familiar in his posture, in the way he moved with intention, yet nothing in his appearance betrayed the life that seemed to pulse beneath it. A man who had clearly known power and authority, who had once lived in a world where details mattered, where nothing was overlooked, and yet here he was, reduced to the guise of a homeless wanderer. Where did you learn that? She asked softly. Her curiosity was sharpened by unease, by fascination. He shrugged lightly, almost casually, but the gesture only heightened her suspicion. Life teaches you. More than any classroom, he replied, a flicker of emotion crossing his face before he masked it. His eyes lingered on her neck again, just long enough to send a ripple of tension through her spine. For a moment, Olivia was silent, the words she wanted to ask trapped behind the instinctive fear of overstepping, of revealing too much. Yet something inside her urged her forward. Do you have a family? Her question hung in the air, fragile, like a glass poised on the edge of a table. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window at the street beyond, at the flow of people and cars, his expression folding into shadows. I used to, he said finally, voice low and distant. Once, a long time ago. The weight in the room shifted. Olivia didn't understand why, but her heart skipped a beat. There was a subtle pain in the way he said it, not raw grief, but a memory sharpened by years of searching, by a loss so profound that it had transformed him entirely. As he finished, he reached slowly into his coat, and Olivia glimpsed a faint glint, a small, carefully folded piece of paper, worn and creased. He placed it back quickly, almost instinctively, as though he feared she would notice, yet the action was deliberate enough to suggest intent. Olivia's curiosity twisted tighter. Something in her whispered that the man before her was no ordinary wanderer, that every movement, every word, every glance carried purpose and history. And yet, the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach, a shadow at the edge of vision that promised revelation, danger, and perhaps the answer to the emptiness she had carried since childhood. Outside, the city roared on, unaware, but inside the cafe, something had begun to shift, a fragile connection forming between two lives, linked by memory, loss, and the invisible thread of secrets waiting to unravel. The following evening, Olivia found herself walking home slower than usual, the city streets stretching long shadows under the lamplight. The encounter with the man lingered like smoke, curling in the corners of her thoughts. Every detail his composure, the way he noticed the small things, the subtle tremor when he looked at her compass kept replaying in her mind. She couldn't explain it, but something about him felt familiar, as though he belonged to the edges of her memory rather than the edges of the city. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, cramped with the weight of unanswered questions. She set the kettle on the stove, hands shaking slightly, and her eyes drifted to the silver compass. It had been with her for years, a link to a past she had been forbidden to fully remember. The memory came unbidden. 7 years old, the park, her father kneeling beside her, smoothing her hair and telling her to wait for ice cream, before she vanished, kidnapped from the very spot he had promised to return. The compass, clutched in her small hand, had been the only thing left untouched by that night of terror. She poured tea into a cup and sat by the window, staring out at the street below, imagining the man still standing there, waiting, watching, silent. Her mind traced possibilities, connections she couldn't yet name. Why had he looked at the compass with that intensity? Why had he moved with such deliberate precision, noticing small details, reading her like he had known her entire life? The phone buzzed, jolting her. A message from her friend at work. You left your notebook behind. Saw something odd inside it. Olivia retrieved it, flipping through the pages of scattered notes, receipts, and sketches she had kept over the years, fragments of memory she had never fully understood. And there it was, a small notation she had forgotten. Compass found it in the park. 7 years old. The handwriting was her own. Scribbled years ago when she tried to piece together the events of that day. Her mind raced. The man's gaze, the compass, the way he had noticed her. It was too precise to be coincidence. And then she remembered a fragment of a story her mother had whispered once, long ago, before grief had hardened her silence. There are some people who search their whole lives for what they've lost. And sometimes, they come back in ways you would never expect. The words struck her now, a jolt she could not ignore. She leaned forward, tracing the compass with her finger. A sudden flash of intuition struck her, an impossible thought, yet one that burned in her chest. She remembered the man's hands, the way he had carefully observed her surroundings, the subtle knowledge in his movements. He was deliberate, precise, patient. He had not wandered aimlessly through the streets. He had been searching. And for a moment, her pulse caught. Her father. The memory of her father. The compass. The man's gaze. Outside, a shadow passed along the street, halting for a heartbeat near the lamplight. Olivia's eyes followed it, heart tightening. The air seemed heavier now, the night charged with the sense of anticipation, danger, and something unspeakably important moving closer, inch by inch. She whispered to herself, barely audible, could it be him? The words hung in the room, fragile, uncertain, but in that uncertainty, the thread of a story lost, broken, and yet waiting had begun to knot. Somewhere in the city, the homeless man stood, unaware of the recognition he had already sparked, his own past and future converging silently with the girl who had carried a compass for 17 years, waiting for a truth neither of them could yet name. The next morning, Olivia returned to the cafe earlier than usual, compelled by a restless curiosity she could neither name nor resist. The city streets were alive with their usual rhythm, but the edges of the day felt sharper, more deliberate, as if every shadow, every passerby, existed to frame the moment she had been dreading and anticipating without knowing it. He was there, waiting, leaning against the counter with that same stillness, that patience that unnerved her. He hadn't asked for food or money, hadn't acknowledged the small chaos of the cafe. He simply observed, eyes scanning with the quiet precision of someone who had long ago learned to read not just people, but the invisible stories they carried. "Good morning," Olivia said, her voice betraying the mix of curiosity and caution she tried to hide. "Did you sleep well?" He tilted his head, a faint smirk touching the corners of his mouth, though his eyes remained unreadable. "As well as one can on borrowed floors," he said, voice calm, almost rehearsed. "Better than some nights." Her fingers instinctively went to the silver compass at her neck. "You notice things," she said softly, unable to stop herself. "I mean, the smallest details. How do you?" He lifted a hand, glancing at the compass, then back to her. "You carry things for a reason," he said. "Objects, memories, even symbols. They speak if you pay attention." His tone was cryptic, but there was an unmistakable depth behind the words. Like someone accustomed to carrying both loss and power in equal measure, she hesitated, studying him. You've seen a lot, haven't you?" A flicker crossed his face, subtle yet undeniable, a brief lapse of the calm he wore like armor. "More than most," he said quietly. "And sometimes, you notice what people don't even know they've lost." Something in Olivia's chest tightened. That phrase, it resonated, echoing the long-forgotten fragments of a childhood memory she had buried deep. Her father, the park, the ice cream, the silver compass. She had always carried it as a talisman, a thread connecting her to something she didn't fully understand. "Did you ever lose someone?" she asked, voice trembling, half out of fear and half out of hope. He froze, the words hanging between them like a fragile bridge over a chasm. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased, and placed it on the table between them. "I lost a lot," he said. "Once, but some losses leave traces, and some traces find their way back." Olivia leaned forward, eyes widening as she noticed faint, almost imperceptible markings on the paper, small numbers, dates, even a scribbled symbol she recognized immediately, a compass, identical to the one she wore. Her pulse thundered in her ears, each beat screaming a truth she didn't yet fully dare to name. You recognize this?" he asked softly, voice low, almost cautious. "I." Olivia stammered, her fingers brushing against the compass at her neck. A memory surged: her 7th birthday, the park, her father kneeling before her, handing her the silver compass, whispering promises she had forgotten in terror and loss. Her eyes snapped to him. Where did you get this?" He studied her, expression unreadable, and for a fleeting second, the weight of 17 years of searching, pain, and secrecy flickered in his gaze. "It found me," he said quietly, almost to himself. And in that silent, electric pause, Olivia felt the first real tremor of understanding. This man, ragged, silent, patient, was no ordinary wanderer. The threads of past and present were beginning to knot, and the truth waiting at their center was dangerous, profound, and utterly unimaginable. The cafe had grown quieter as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting the tables in long streaks of gold and amber. Olivia sat across from the man, her fingers fidgeting with the silver compass, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs in a rhythm that felt too fast, too insistent. She had tried to dismiss him as just another lost soul, but the way he observed, the subtle confidence in his gestures, and the intensity of his gaze had stripped that illusion away. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, and for the first time, Olivia noticed the faint lines around his eyes, lines etched by years of vigilance, loss, and unseen authority. His eyes softened, but the calm deliberation remained, as though he was measuring each word before releasing it into the fragile air between them. "That necklace," he began slowly, voice low, careful. "Where did you get it?" Olivia traced her fingers over the silver compass again. "My father. He found it for me," she said, hesitating, her words trembling as if saying them aloud might summon something she wasn't ready to confront. "He gave it to me on my 7th birthday, at the park, before he went to buy ice cream. And I never saw him again." Her voice cracked slightly, the memory surfacing in vivid, unbearable fragments: the laughter, the sunlight, the warmth, and then the emptiness when he vanished. He nodded subtly, his gaze fixed on her, and for a heartbeat, the air between them thickened. "I remember that day," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. 17 years ago. I gave it to you. You said you wanted ice cream. I went to get it, and when I returned, you were gone." His hands trembled slightly, a rare crack in the armor of calm he wore like a shield. Olivia froze, the room narrowing until only the two of them existed. What do you mean? Who are you?" Her voice was a mix of fear, disbelief, and hope. He leaned back, his eyes distant, as if reliving the memory in precise, painful detail. "I've searched for you every day since," he said quietly. "People, imposters, they all tried to take your place, claiming to be my daughter. But I knew. I had to wait. I had to find you, and I couldn't let the world see me, not yet. Not until I was sure it was really you." Olivia's breath caught. The compass in her hand felt impossibly heavy. You knew me?" "Yes," he said, voice stronger now, almost a growl beneath the calm. "I had to become someone else, someone unnoticeable, to search without interference, to find the truth without being blinded by greed, or lies, or pity. I became a homeless man, to walk the streets where fate had lost us." Her hands shook as she pressed the compass to her chest. You're my father." He leaned forward again, eyes glistening, and for a brief instant, the years of pain, the desperation, and the longing broke through. I've been searching for you for 17 years. And now, finally, I have found you." Olivia's world tilted, her breath hitching as a flood of memories of her father, the kidnapping, the endless gaps, the imposters rushed through her. The truth was overwhelming, almost unbearable, yet undeniable. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a small envelope, placing it carefully in front of her. "DNA," he said, calm but firm, "to end the waiting. To prove what neither of us needed words for, but what the world required. In 72 hours, we will know, for certain." Olivia stared at the envelope, her hands trembling, heart pounding. Outside, the city continued, oblivious, but inside the cafe, the threads of lost time, stolen years, and hidden truths were converging, taut and electric, ready to snap into revelation. 72 hours later, Olivia sat at her apartment desk, hands trembling as she stared at the envelope that had arrived in the morning. The postmark unremarkable, but the weight of its contents impossible to ignore. Her heart pounded in her chest, a chaotic rhythm that matched the storm of emotions roiling inside her. Every instinct screamed, every memory clawed at her, reminding her of the park, the compass, the laughter, the vanishing dot. She tore the envelope open, unfolding the DNA report with hands that felt too heavy to move. Each line of text was clinical, precise, impersonal. And yet, with every word, the world tilted beneath her. The final line, the line she had been waiting for, dreading, hoping, stared back at her with the clarity of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Confirmed. Parent-child relationship established. She dropped the paper, her fingers brushing against the compass as if it could anchor her trembling body. Her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes, her chest tightening in a mixture of relief, disbelief, and a joy she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 17 years. He had been there. Her father, the man she had passed countless nights imagining, wondering if he had survived, if he had loved her still, if he had ever searched, or given up entirely. And now, impossibly, he was here, standing just across the room from her, ragged and unassuming to anyone else, but impossibly, irrevocably, the man who had never stopped looking. It's true, Olivia whispered, her voice fragile, tremulous. You're really my father. He nodded, a tremor of relief in his eyes that belied the stoicism he had worn like armor for decades. I am, he said softly, voice heavy with years of suppressed longing. I've walked the streets, hidden from the world, survived the years of imposters and false claims, just to find you, to make sure it was really you, and no one else. The tears she had fought to hold back spilled freely now, hot and overwhelming. She sank into his arms, the compass pressing against her chest like the final link to a past that had felt forever broken. I thought you were gone, she whispered, the words almost strangled. And now, he murmured against her hair, we can begin to reclaim what was stolen from us. His eyes, sharp and piercing once more, hinted at a fire beneath the grief, a calculated, patient fury waiting for its moment. He had survived loss, betrayal, and imposters for 17 years. And now, armed with certainty, he would not forgive those who had stolen time from his daughter. Olivia lifted her head, eyes meeting his. What do we do? He smiled faintly, not warmth but intent, a predator assessing his prey. We take back what is ours. Everything they thought they could hide, every lie, every betrayal. They will answer, and we will make them regret ever touching our lives. A thrill of determination coursed through Olivia, mingled with fear and exhilaration. She had been lost, abandoned, hunted by imposters, forced to navigate a world that never made sense. But now, the compass, the man, the truth, they were weapons, and together, they were unstoppable. Outside, the city carried on unaware, oblivious to the reckoning that had begun within these walls. Inside, the threads of lost time, stolen innocence, and hidden power were finally converging, coiling tight, preparing to strike. And in the silence that followed, father and daughter understood one truth: justice would not be patient forever, and the world that had taken from them would soon burn under the weight of their return. The city skyline glimmered under the early evening sun, skyscrapers cutting jagged silhouettes against gold and violet streaks. Inside a sleek, private office atop one of those towers, Olivia stood at the window, the silver compass now resting atop her wrist like a talisman of destiny fulfilled. The man who had once been ragged and unassuming, the homeless figure she had encountered on the street, stood beside her, no longer a shadow, but the world's richest man in all the splendor and authority that title implied. The office smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, of power and quiet menace. Outside, the city moved oblivious, unaware that in this room, the course of lives, fortunes, and fates was about to shift irreversibly. Olivia turned to face him, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of his years, the decades of loss, patience, and planning that had brought them to this moment. They thought they could take from us, he said, voice calm but edged with the intensity of someone who had waited 17 years for justice. They assumed absence meant weakness, that time erased bonds, that greed could rewrite reality. They were wrong. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Her chest still ached from the reunion, from the flood of memories, kidnapping, imposters, the endless gaps, but now it burned with purpose, the fire of reclamation. Where do we start? She asked, her voice slow, deliberate. He smiled faintly, predatory, calculating. First, we remind them who holds the truth. Every claim forged, every lie told in my name, every impostor who dared call themselves my daughter. They will pay. He gestured to a sleek console on the desk, each screen displaying names, accounts, Evidence, everything painstakingly compiled over years. Everything they thought hidden, everything they assumed lost, is ours now. We strike where it hurts most. Reputation, power, wealth. Olivia stepped forward, feeling the power pulse through her like electricity. She remembered the years of confusion, the people who had tried to scam her father, the endless nights wondering if she had been abandoned forever. I want them to feel every second of fear we felt, she said softly, eyes blazing. I want them to understand what it's like to lose, what it's like to be hunted and powerless. He nodded, pride and affection in his gaze. And they will, he said. We'll make them regret ever underestimating us, ever daring to touch the life we share. Her mind raced with possibilities, with every betrayal she had endured now transformed into strategy. Together, they would dismantle the lives of those who had profited from deception, piece by piece, carefully, brilliantly, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. The patience of years, the scars of loss, the cunning born of survival, they would unleash it all, and the world would finally see the strength of what had been taken from them. She glanced down at the compass, still warm against her wrist, and felt the weight of destiny settle around her shoulders. 17 years of searching, suffering, and uncertainty had led here, and now, with her father by her side, she was no longer a victim, but a force heir to unimaginable wealth, keeper of truth, and instrument of retribution. Outside, the city moved, ignorant of the storm brewing at its heart. Inside, father and daughter stood together, the world's richest man and the girl he had never stopped searching for, poised to reclaim everything, leaving the greedy, the deceitful, and the cruel to tremble before the reckoning that had been 17 years in the making. The first domino would fall tonight.